Hello. Coffee and Comics here, or Faith Jacobs. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey into voice acting and kind of where it all began. So let's go back to 2012. So I'll set the scene a little bit. So it's 2012, and I discovered fan-dubs. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Faith, everybody knows what a fan-dub is. Yeah, but I didn't at the time. So 2012, I get my PlayStation 3 for the first time. And it has the ability to go on early Netflix. Imagine this. And on television at the time was Tron Uprising. Oh boy, I loved Tron Uprising. I discovered it late, but it came to Netflix in 2012, and then subsequently left that summer, which is really weird, but I was very mad because what Tron Uprising had a brilliant premise, but the reason why I bring up Tron Uprising, not to gush over it, though I could do an entire episode dedicated to gushing about how possibly, I'm pretty sure Tron Uprising began an interesting era of storytelling for me. Sort of how it ignited what will become one of the many foundations from pieces of media that would inspire me to create stories the way that I do now. So Tron Uprising, great TV show. Sadly didn't last beyond one season. Had the writers of Lost. Had a great premise. Had a great voice cast. Bruce Boxleitner, Elijah Wood, Mandy Moore was part of it. So many great voices on that show. But why it's important is because I became such a fan of it. It became definitely one of my interests, like as far as like TV shows and like franchises went, to the point that I would write fun little stories for myself featuring the characters. And so I was doing that, and I remember looking around YouTube for clips one day. I was always trying to draw the characters, and I came across something. It was like a Aladdin, not Aladdin. It was a Latino fan dub of Tron Uprising. And I was like, fan dub? What's a fan dub? And so I learned what a fan dub was. And it was because of that Latino fan dub, that's how it was labeled, that I began to take my little, because I had my 3DS at this point, I think. I took my little 3DS and I would mute the television on Netflix, and I would listen over and over again to scenes from the show, particularly, I think I liked Paige. I liked the character of Paige. Like, she was such a badass. Um, and I really I wanted to be Paige. She was so cool to me. And I would record my voice using my little 3DS to capture the footage. And then obviously what I would do is when Beck would speak, I would unmute the TV, and then when Paige would go to speak, I feel like I wrote down her words or memorized. I watched the scene. I watched that show so many times to the point that I knew all the words and all the dialogue, and so I would just, you know, mimic, I guess, what she was saying. And I remember listening to it and thinking, oh, this is so cool. And then from that fan dub, which I did, I remember discovering James Arnold Taylor's YouTube channel at that point. It was 2012. And Clone Wars was still on TV. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Clone Wars was still on television at this point. But he had a YouTube channel. And it was fun, and it was safe, and it was clean, and and I just remember finding something about voice acting. And because I was pretty young at the time. But I did. I don't know, something about I remember what it was. I listened to James's Clone Wars stage show. I found either he had it taped on his YouTube channel or something, but yeah, that's kind of where it all began. Was just listening to James Arnold Taylor, and then of course subsequently finding Troy Baker and Rob Paulson and like the whole crew. So really, I guess if anyone were to ever ask me, well, gee, Faith, why'd you get into voice acting, or what got you into it? It would probably be, well, a combination of a couple things. Number one, fan dub. This little, Latino fan dub from Tron Uprising. And then finding James Arnold Taylor and Troy Baker and, the whole slew of that stuff, and listening to D. Bradley Baker, and all those guys, just listening to all those voices from the early 2000s was really kind of my jumping off point. Kind of fell into it. And well, in order to properly explain that too, I was a kid who had a stutter. And part of that was, you wouldn't know it now. Maybe you would. It's still there sometimes. It's there when I get excited. But I was a kid who had a stutter, and I got made fun of a lot by my peers. And so I remember when I discovered voice acting, I don't know, there was something about James and Dee and this whole world of people who showed me that even if you have a difficulty, whether it's a speech impediment or you feel as if you're a little slow, because I very much had a lot of learning difficulties at that time. But it doesn't matter. You can still overcome that and reach incredible heights. And I don't think that's what anybody understood, I think, when I began jumping into this, is I've tried a lot of things. I've tried every activity under the sun. But why voice acting stands out to me, why it works, is because, I don't know. There you go. I don't know. I don't know why it works. I don't know why it clicked. But it clicked with me. I'd always loved to sing when I was little. And I've gotten really good at it. I've never had a lesson. I self-taught myself. I'm completely self-taught. And now maybe there are one or two techniques I could gain from a professional. Maybe there's some training. Maybe there's some things I could learn. But really, honestly, the only reason why I'm pursuing what I am and doing what I'm doing is because I wanted to. I started at a very young age. And I really have been at this since college. Like in pursuit of trying to land something. I really have been. And I'll tell you, there have been so many ups and downs. I mean, that young age, that younger me was just laying a foundation. And I'll tell you, I mean, there are people out there who always, and who ask the question, how do I become a voice actor? How do I do this? How do I do that? And I had those questions too. And I had nobody to ask. So for me, it was years and years and years and years and years of listening. I sat in a college class once with a bunch of people who were like, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I'm sitting here going like, well, there's this resource and there's that resource, and I will link some of the resources that I used and looked at when I first began jumping into this. And I've been, but I was always researching. I was always listening. The thing is, and so many voice actors will tell you this, so many, even the ones who give you classes will tell you this. Nobody can teach you voice acting. Nobody can teach you voice acting at all. It doesn't happen like that. If somebody says they can teach you voice acting, they're lying. I feel like even Yuri Lowenthal in his book, which I have right next to me, I feel like even Yuri Lowenthal in his book is like, nobody can teach you voice acting. Not even my book can teach you voice acting. I want to say that. And if you can get the book, Voiceover, Voice Actor, by Yuri Lowenthal and his wife Tara Platt, I would recommend it, particularly the the second edition, Spectacular. It's really great. It's wonderful to have. I wish I would have known about this when I was younger. I wish this would have been out when I was younger, because I probably would have, but it wasn't written until 2018, sadly. I wish I would have had this. But it's great. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And again, I am pretty sure that in this, in this book, they talk about, no one can teach you voice acting. But so that's one resource, at least in the now that we have, is of course Voiceover Voice Actor by Yuri Lowenthal and Tara Platt. Second edition, recommend it highly. It's a great read. The other thing too, don't know if it's been updated. If we're talking resources, would probably be iwannabeavoiceactor.com, which is by D. Bradley Baker. And then, like I said, the other thing that just really worked for me was listening to voice actors. And I'm not talking like, okay, when you go to a Comic-Con panel, everybody wants to ask the question about, characters, projects. If you're lucky and you can find a panel where they get to talk about their craft more than they talk about, because trust me, character work and all that stuff is important. But listening to interviews, listening to podcasts, listening to... I'm not talking about podcasts specifically about voiceover. I never sought out podcast episodes with Troy Baker as for voice acting. I never sought out podcasts or interviews with James Arnold Taylor specifically about voice acting. And there goes the truck. I love it when things record. I was never seeking those like directly. It was the indirect search and looking for things from these people that led me to find just things and little gems and, all that stuff. Like how do I say this? To understand voice acting is not something that I think, again, can be taught. If anything, I feel like I heard Adam Harrington say this. He was like, it's learned on the job. Now, Adam Harrington, if you listen to his story, he was a telemarketer. So when he stepped into his first, voice actor class, just to get some tools under your belt, because let's also clarify that just because I say that nobody can teach you voice acting doesn't mean that you skip the classes. Don't go to those classes expecting you're going to come out knowing how to voice act. Go to those classes expecting you're going to gain tools to understand how to breathe, understand your pitch, your volume, your tone, that's what you're going to come away from. Even I went to my very first voice actors class, and I knew half the stuff in there already because I had listened to voice actors. I just listened, and that's the thing. You're going to get all the information you need by listening to the people who are in the industry. And that's what I mean. Like, when I hear people say, I need this amount of training and that amount of training, it's like, yeah, training's great. It will help you. But the real training that you're going to get with voice acting is on the job. You can get tools. But where you will gain your skill, where I gained my skill, I did fan dubs. Were they great fan dubs? No. But I did them. I did fan dubs. I listened to the people who I looked up to, who were already established in the industry and worked hard to get there. I've made my own demo reels. I've made my own singing reels. I've probably saved more money doing that than trying to, I don't wait on an agency to get me auditions. I go and I seek them myself. And I've been seeking those auditions and those opportunities for a long time. The voiceover world is competitive, that's for sure. I'm not going to lie. And the industry is always shifting, always changing. Right now, we're in the era of fiction podcasts and short, internet ads. But the world of voice acting is, it's not something that you can necessarily, like, okay, you can go to school and you can take classes in acting for on-camera acting, but on-camera acting and voice acting, as much as there are similarities, how do I say this? I often have heard, and I remember hearing a couple of actors in the industry going, acting is acting is acting. And yes, I agree. The voice acting world is simply that, acting. However, the difference between on-camera and voice acting is simply this. You have to tell the story to me using the entire toolkit that is your voice. Because there is no, unless it's animation, if we're talking straight voice acting in I do podcasts in a podcast setting. If I'm in a fighting scene in a podcast, you're not going to be able to see the strain of my face as I'm fighting off this enemy. That has to be done with sound effects, Foley, music, and the voice of the actor playing the character. Your voice needs to sound strained. It needs to be, a grunt roll. And also, another thing too, the voice acting world has a completely different set of terminology to the on-camera world. Sometimes things that might mean one thing in the on-camera world mean something completely different in the voice acting world. They're the same phrase. They have two completely different meanings. At least, how do I say this? Let me rephrase that. It's the same phrasing. It just might be structured a little bit differently. Like, okay, When you think of an extra in an on-camera role, you think of that character in the background who's like a janitor or a guard or someone who's in like the shopping center of like a marketplace. You know, let's take a big series like Game of Thrones, for example. Okay? In Game of Thrones, there's so many extras because they're trying to fill out a world. Extras in a podcast setting. And let's add this. So extras are often, the connotation is a non-speaking role in the world of the on camera, on set kind of stuff. In the podcast world, an extra is somebody who has 1 to possibly 3 lines in possibly 1 or more episodes. They're a minor role. Because in the podcast world, there are no such thing as non-speaking roles. You have to fill out the world with tiny, minor speaking roles. In a podcast setting, the same thing goes for an animated setting. Now, difference with animation is if you need characters in the background who don't do anything, say anything really significant, you can do that. But there still are those minor extra background roles, those side characters, your ensemble of characters who help to fill out the world. Versus in the live action on camera world, an extra doesn't have any lines. And they really are regaled to a non-speaking role. However, we're talking voice acting here. That logic doesn't track because there is no such thing as a non-speaking role in a podcast. Everybody has a role in the world of voice acting, particularly fiction podcasts, because we're so limited, just to the sounds and the sound effects and the Foley and all that we really have to rely heavily on our dialogue. Scripts for podcasts are bigger than your typical screenplay. They're bigger, and they often have more dialogue than they do have action, because the action is, how do I say this? The action that you hear in a podcast is often generated by Foley, sound effects, and music, rather than visualization in the traditional sense. So, if anything is happening, it has to be conveyed with dialogue, in tune with Foley. That's why Foley is so important in the world of fiction podcasting, or an audio drama, if you will, because they're an evolution of the radio play. And that's what radio plays were. They were just sounds and music and voice. So that's kind of the difference there. So even though voice acting is acting, and there is an element of acting, the thing is, there are so many on-camera actors who jump into a booth thinking it's easy. And there are so many people who are in Hollywood they jump at that big animated feature, and they're like, oh yeah, I just come in here and then I just do my thing. No. I want to say it was like Don Cheadle, who, for Iron Man, maybe, possibly, who was like, this is hard. I'm like, and I'm thinking to myself, I remember reading that story, thinking to myself, yeah, it is. It's harder than you think because you lack the physicality, you lack the facial expression. You have to emulate a performance simply using your vocal talents. No, it's not that we're stiff in the booth. I heard James Arnold Taylor, or it might have been James, but it also might have been T. Bradley Baker, who was like, I'm not stiff in the booth. I'm not like, my arms aren't straight down against like my sides, and I'm not, I'm not doing anything. There is an element of physicality, to what you're doing in the booth, because if there wasn't, you get pretty stiff performances. Now, obviously, when it comes to home booths, sometimes you don't have that freedom, so you really have to you really kind of have to gauge how best to do your performance when you're limited. I would say I'm limited a little bit. Like I have to record when it's super quiet, or I have to record, like there are, now luckily the editing software I use when I actually edit things out of my voice recordings, this podcast is for me. Like, I don't really care if a truck passes by and it gets caught on the mic, but there is a denoise option in my editing software that I use. So it allows me to cut out any noise that isn't my voice, which is good. But the whole point is like on the subject of physicality in the booth, you really, 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 really have to you don't want a stiff performance. So if you watch any voice actor, and I mean true voice actor, not somebody who's been on camera, but somebody who really, 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 really is just solely a voice actor, and you watch them, if there's a BTS, a behind the scenes, for the booth recordings. Great example, Sam Witwer of Star Wars: The Clone Wars fame, of Star Wars: The Force Unleashed fame. Sam Witwer has the most amazing physicality when he is voicing Maul. It's insane. It's insane when he voices Darth Maul, and I would highly recommend, and I might even try to find it and link this below, possibly. Go and watch Sam Witwer's performance as Darth Maul. But not his performance that he did in the show, I'm talking like, watch the behind the scenes footage that you can find online, because you'll understand what I'm talking about. And that's the other thing too. I always watch the behind the scenes. I always, you just take a listen to these people, and you really kind of watch what they do. Only then I think will you be able to understand voice acting. But in regards to my own journey with it, these were the things. These were the things that I was exposed to, that I found in my research, that I just kind of, I ate it up. Really, I didn't, I had nobody. I had nobody to give it to me. I had to find it myself. And what I found was I liked what I was seeing. I liked what I was hearing. I knew it wasn't going to be an easy journey, but I knew it was a journey that I needed to take. And so, I mean, I'm sure I had notebooks, I'm sure, but I just know that everything I ever learned, I absorbed, I retained, I wanted so badly. But I had no mic. I had no computer. I didn't have, I was experimenting with things. Sure, I would take my own fan stories and I would read them and I would put little sound effects to them. You know, I was already interested in doing this. I've been interested in this since I was very young. And I will keep going at it. You know, I've done a couple auditions lately. They were enjoyable. They were very enjoyable. But honestly, my journey with voice acting is not, oh, yes, I had people who were interested in voice acting and therefore said, go for it. I had teachers. I have teachers who I knew who saw my interest and absolutely 100% encouraged that. But, I kind of had to find it on my own. And it really began back in 2012 with Tron Uprising and fan dubs and learning what that was. And then subsequently falling into James Arnold Taylor's YouTube channel and learning all that I could from him, because he would really kind of go through his technique and all the things he had learned, and an abundance of information there. But everything that I know, everything that I've done, everything that I've continued to do, and I've learned, I learned on my own because I sought it out. I sought out the websites, I sought out the places to go. I've made my own demo reel. Is it great? No, maybe not, but it's to the best of my ability, and I think it's okay. I think it's decent. I've made my own singing reel. I've made my own fiction podcast project, too. Working on Tirnanak still. It'll be done when it's done. But everything I've ever done, I've done by myself. I seek out the auditions. I do them. I go for them. Now there was a time when I didn't. And I can get into, and I probably will get into right now, some of the pitfalls and some of the the doubts. But the one thing, because it came up in my memories actually recently, was the video of my very first voice acting class. And I will tell you this much. When I stood behind that professional mic in that class and I recorded my very first commercial spot exercise that we were doing for that night, the thing that I remember is everybody else in the room went away. It was me, it was the director of the class, and I was standing at a mic ready to record. I was in the booth. That's how it was in my mind. Everything else went away. I belonged. And it felt right. And it still feels right. Being behind a mic is where I belong. I don't know if I'll ever go for or try to do anything on camera. I don't think I could. I don't think I'd be good at it. That's my own self-doubt, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it. But the one thing that I do know is I have been a writer, a director, I've acted, I've edited, I've cast people in roles, or as the amateurs say, we've casted. I have cast, I have edited, I have recorded, I've auditioned, I felt the nerves, I felt the nausea. Whenever you do your very first audition, there is a wave of nausea that comes over you. It came over me, for sure. But the one thing that I know and hold true as I wrap up this podcast episode is it is a long journey. And in the voice acting world, you are either for it or not. I don't care where you are in the voice acting world or the acting world in general. But the thing about this particular part of the industry is you have to stick with it. You also have to know that not every role is going to be that big role. It's not going to be your big debut. It's not going to be a big one. Sometimes you're going to have a tiny role. But the tiny roles are sometimes a good thing. It's like if all we had in the world of voice acting were just main characters. Well, then what a boring story. There are always sidekicks and side characters and little small extra roles that need to have voices, and they are important because that's how you fill out a world in the voice actor world. That is how you fill out somebody's world, is with the little voices of a shopkeeper, the little voices of a guard or a thug. They're what matter, too. They might be smaller, but they're still a role. And they need voices. They just do. It's not always about the leads. Sometimes the side characters can be pretty cool, too. Think of it like a co-star role. Sometimes that little co-star role can be important. Even if they have very few lines, it's important. So, with that said, how did I begin voice acting? Honestly, it was a fun start. I began with fan dubbing, and it's transitioned into what I'm doing now. But I was surrounded by voice acting. And that was the thing that I think I realized, is I was surrounded by voice acting. I listened to audio dramas and audiobooks and just all kinds of things. You're surrounded by voice acting. Every day. Whether it's in the the TV show, the animated TV shows you consume, you're surrounded by sound. That's where it started for me. And I'm gonna keep going with it. So, thank you for listening. This has been Faith Jacobs, signing off.